Hello everybody. Welcome to our FloodHelpNY Risk Rating 2.0 webinar. My name is Rabia Al-Thabani and I'm a program associate here at the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. Just a few announcements before we get started. You might have noticed when you came in that the webinar is being recorded tonight. And in regards to questions, we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, but you can still type in your question in the chat while it's going. Let me start. Next slide. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd like to first introduce the partners who are bringing you this critical content tonight. We have with us the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, and NHS Brooklyn. Next slide. So the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice works to ensure that New York City is prepared to withstand and emerge stronger from the impacts of climate change, mitigate its greenhouse gas emissions, and address needed remediation and environmental coordination efforts from an equity and public health perspective. Next slide, please. The center is one of the largest homeowner services organizations in New York City. We were founded in 2008 in response to the foreclosure crisis and have since expanded to support and expand affordable homeownership across New York State. All of our services are free to homeowners. Folks can reach us online or by calling 311 and ask for help with homeowner issues. Next slide. We also have with us tonight NHS Brooklyn. NHS Brooklyn creates and preserves affordable housing by providing opportunities for homeownership, education, financial assistance, and community leadership. Next slide. The FloodHelpNY.org is a platform that engages and informs New York City homeowners about how to protect their home and finances from flooding that is expected to worsen with rising sea levels caused by climate change. Next slide, please. On the FloodHelpNY website, you can look up your property on the flood zone map, learn about flood insurance and how to lower your premium through retrofit. You'll find small business resources and resources on climate change, stormwater flooding and hurricanes, and plenty of information. Now I will hand it over to Christian Salazar, who is also from the center and who's going to give us an in-depth look into flood insurance. Christian, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rabia. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Salazar, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, and I oversee FloodHelpNY.org. We welcome you to today's event, where we will be discussing FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, also known as the NFIP. We will also be discussing Risk Rating 2.0, the newest iteration of FEMA's flood risk calculation. This presentation aims to give you a high-level overview of everything you need to know to manage your flood risk and flood insurance. Besides Rabia, I'm joined today by Beth Malone from Neighborhood Housing Services of Brooklyn. Beth is a housing counselor who works specifically on flood insurance education and training. She will answer your questions at the end of today's webinar. You can also put questions in the chat during the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide. Here's an overview of what we'll be covering in today's presentation: the benefits of flood insurance, the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance rate maps, flood insurance coverage and rates, pay renewals and lapses in coverage, Risk Rating 2.0, local resources for you to connect you so that you can learn more, and finally, a Q&A. Next slide, please. Before we begin, we want to poll those of you in the audience to gauge your understanding of flood insurance. I'm going to launch that poll, and please use the functions on your screen to answer the question. We will give you a moment to submit your responses before we review them. If for some reason you're unable to select your answer in the poll, please answer the questions in the chat. Okay, so it looks like most of you have some knowledge about flood insurance. So that's a great place to start. And we hope you can get a lot of new information out of this presentation. Next slide, please. So why are we here today? We're here to talk about flood risk and flood insurance because New Yorkers know firsthand how destructive flooding is, both in our homes and our communities. In New York City, we are very vulnerable to coastal floods and severe rainfall flooding due to our position on the coast. Our city is full of concrete, which makes drawing water into the earth very difficult. The center, through FloodHelpNY.org, works with the City of New York, including the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, to conduct outreach and education on the importance of flood insurance. We hope today's event serves as a reminder for why it is so important to learn about your flood risk and determine if a flood insurance policy is necessary to keep you, your loved ones, and your home safe. Next slide. So what is the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP? The NFIP is overseen by FEMA and provides financial assistance to property owners, renters, and businesses. Changes to the NFIP largely require congressional reforms. Communities covered by the NFIP have agreed to uphold certain building code standards and other flood management practices to enforce regulations to help mitigate the effects of flooding on new and improved structures. Flood insurance is not included in homeowners insurance and needs to be purchased separately for you to obtain coverage. Flood insurance is federally required for some properties, including those with a federally backed mortgage or those that have received federal disaster assistance. An NFIP policy is the only way to ensure that your property is protected from flood damage. Next slide, please. In addition to what was just mentioned, here are a few things you should know about the NFIP. Every building has a flood zone. Building in high-risk flood zones may be required to buy flood insurance. Flood insurance is available for any zone, not just high-risk ones. That's why it's important to understand your flood risk, because you might need flood insurance to protect your home and not know it. Also, claims can be filed without a federal declaration of disaster. Hurricanes Sandy and Ida are examples of federal declarations of disasters, but they can also be localized flooding that covers a few neighborhoods, not necessarily floods that cover all of New York City. Next slide. So this may seem obvious, but FEMA defines flooding very specifically. In this case, flooding is defined as rising tides or moving groundwater, flooding from water main breaks or rainstorms, and a partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of dry land or of 2 or more properties. It's important to note once again that there are no flood protections in any standard property policy. Your homeowner's insurance will not cover flood damage in the event of a flood. Next slide. So the flood insurance rate maps, or FIRMs as they're known, map the special flood hazard areas, base elevations, and the risk premium zones for participating communities in the NFIP. Mapping is a process. And as you can see on the slide, FIRM has gone through a couple of updates in New York City since they were introduced. These maps are in the process of being updated and are anticipated to be finalized as soon as 2025. Next slide. As far as coverage, it's important to understand exactly what is and isn't covered under your flood insurance policy. The maximum coverage for your home is $250,000. This may include heat and hot water systems, appliances, carpeting, and foundation walls. The maximum coverage for the contents in your home is $100,000. This may include personal property, including clothing and furniture, window air conditioners, and washer dryers. Contents that are excluded from coverage include damage sustained in basements, desks, patios, and fences, and cars and their parts. One thing to note is the deductibles vary, so it's important to read through your policy to make sure you know exactly what your deductible is. It's also important to note that only personal property is covered for renters. Next slide, please. It's important to update your renewals on time. All policies take 30 days to go into effect. Now that we are entering hurricane season, or we're actually in hurricane season, it's important to get coverage as soon as possible to ensure coverage in the event of a flood. Don't wait until it floods to consider getting insurance. If payment is received outside the 30-day grace period, any previously applied subsidies will be eliminated. Additionally, the full risk premium will be required, meaning you will not get the benefits of the 18% cap. To stay on track with the payments and maintain any subsidies you may have, Read over your policy to learn when your renewal is due. Next slide. So what is Risk Rating 2.0? FEMA introduced Risk Rating 2.0 in October 2021, and it's now the NFIP's current rating structure. Rather than using flood maps to determine the flood insurance prices, Risk Rating 2.0 uses several variables to more accurately determine your flood risk and by extension, your flood insurance premium. This will result in premium changes for many people nationwide. Some will see their rates decrease and some may experience an increase. FEMA is required to cap increases at 18% per year. So, starting in October 2021, Risk Rating 2.0 was used in all new policies. As of April of this year, if you are renewing your policy, these new rates will be applied. Next, please. As I mentioned, Risk Rating 2.0 uses several variables to more accurately calculate your flood risk. These include types of water sources, the distance from the coast to another flood source, flood frequency, flood types, property characteristics, and the property's prior flood losses. Next slide. But I know that's a lot of new information, but there are things that are not changing under Risk Rating 2.0. Your annual rate increase will not exceed 18%. If you have a mandatory flood insurance requirement now, it won't change. And if you're considering buying the previous owner's policy, the policy can be transferred to you with their discounts included. Next slide, please. Now that we've shown you this information, we're going to show you a recap video.
Flooding is the most costly and the most common disaster risk to the majority of American communities. Nearly every disaster involves flooding of some sort. New York City has 520 miles of total coastline and has more residents living in high-risk flood zones than any other city in the country. Unfortunately, mandatory flood insurance zones are not accurate predictors of your flood risk. You may be at risk even if you live outside the flood zone. Homeowners insurance and flood insurance are different and must be purchased separately. Unlike homeowners insurance, flood insurance covers damage caused by rising water, even if there is not a major disaster event. And even if there is a major disaster and you don't have flood insurance, you will have to rely on government assistance. So let's talk numbers. After Hurricane Harvey, homeowners without insurance received an average FEMA assistance award of $4,500. But the average home repair costs were nearly $50,000, more than 10 times the average FEMA payout. However, those with flood insurance received on average more than $100,000. The good news? Flood insurance is more affordable than you may think. Many policies can be purchased for as little as $3 per day. Flood insurance coverage is the most effective way to mitigate flood risk and ensure your family and home are protected. Visit FloodHelpNY.org to learn what your home's flood risk is and how to get the coverage you may need.
Thank you for watching the video. We hope it was informative. Please go to FloodHelpNY.org for more flood insurance resources. Use the interactive map to search for your property and learn your flood risk. Learn how your business can plan for flooding, and explore flood mitigation options and ways to lower your insurance premium. Next slide, please. For more information on flood risk and flood insurance, you can contact FEMA directly with any questions you may have. The phone number and website is there on the screen. And you can sign up with Notify NYC on your smartphone to receive emergency service alerts, including real-time flooding warnings. Next slide, please. Please contact us at info@floodhelpny.org. You can also contact Beth Malone, who's been here answering your questions. Here's her email address and phone number. Please take a moment to write that down. We also have been publishing questions and answers from the webinars to the Flood Help NY newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website. We also want to inform you about a new campaign from FEMA this summer about flood insurance. Be on the lookout. There will be a lot of ads and on social media and other places on the internet to inform you about the different issues you may run into with flood insurance.